Welcome to Baptist Press This Week. As the November 2022 election nears, Christians have much to consider. In this episode, we talk with Dan Darling as we consider what you should be thinking about as we approach the election in November. Well, Dan, thanks for joining us for Baptist Press This Week. Before we get to some questions about culture and politics, talk to us a little bit about your role there at Southwestern Seminary.
Well, I'm the director of the Land Center for Cultural Engagement, and I'm an associate professor for faith and culture here at Texas Baptist College. The center is named in honor of Dr. Richard Land, who's a former ERLC president. And really the whole idea of our center is to really help Christians think through moral and ethical issues, to have conversations about cultural engagement, and really train the next generation, how to think and live and be faithful in their context, in their time.
Yeah, well, those are definitely some things that we want to talk with you about, and so we're glad to have you on Baptist Press This Week. Let's just start right out of the gate. What are some of the most important issues facing American voters as we move toward the November 2022 election?
Well, I think there's a number of issues. I think probably top of mind for a lot of folks is the economic issues, and sometimes we separate out the economic issues from the moral issues. But for a lot of families, it's harder to make ends meet because of rising inflation. I think everyone's feeling that. And so that has when inflation has kind of a destabilizing effect on families in many ways. So that's one issue. I think for conservative Christians, the issues of the sanctity of life and religious liberty, can our institutions, our Christian institutions, our religious institutions function as they intend to? Can they function according to their historic beliefs, or will they be infringed on by the state? I think there's been enormous wins on religious liberty, but I think we want to be vigilant on those things. And I think there's a range of other issues. I think one of the things that is bubbling up in the last couple of years is education. And I think parents are increasingly getting involved both in shaping the school boards, local school boards where they live, but also things like parental choice. And education can be polarizing, and good Christians have different views on that. But I do think for a lot of people, how we educate our kids, what access we have to good education, is really becoming more and more of an issue that's driving people to the polls.
Okay. As we think about those issues, voters need discernment. Church members need discernment as they take in social media, as they see ads on TV and hear them on radio, as they, we receive those postcards in our mailbox. What's the discernment? What's that actually sound like? What's that look like? Maybe take one of those issues. Take education. What's that discernment look like as we listen to candidates making that push toward November?
Well, I think number one, we should endeavor to be involved. I think as Christians in a representative republic like ours that have been given the stewardship to shape policy that affects our neighbors, if we're to love our neighbors ourselves, we should care about the institutions and the policies that affect our neighbors' flourishing. And so we have the stewardship. I think we should steward it well. That looks different for different folks, but I think at the baseline level, I think voting requires some responsibility to try to get to know the candidates as best we can, to listen to what they're saying, to hear them out. And you're always making difficult choices, even if you're voting for a candidate that you really like and shares most of your values. You're voting for someone who is imperfect, and not everything they outline is something you agree with. But I think you make the best decision according to the principles from Scripture that you hold dear. And then I think once you vote, hold that candidate accountable. I think one of the things that happens sometimes is that we think, well, I voted for them, I have to be a champion for this person and defend everything that they do, good behavior, bad behavior. But I think a vote is just a small part of that. I think we do the best we can. We vote the best way we can for the policies we think are important, and then really try to hold them accountable that way. and pray for them.
That's good.
Praying for our elected officials, praying, someone who steps forward to run for office is really putting themselves out there, their families, everything. Immediately when you run for office, half the country hates you, right? And so people willing to step up, we should pray for them, as 1 Timothy 2 says.
Yeah, it really is a sacrifice of time, and like you say, I mean, those are folks with families just like the rest of us. That's good. Pastors are supposed to be focused on the issues rather than the candidates necessarily when it comes to their ministry. You have been a pastor. You certainly served churches through your role there at Southwestern and through your work in the past at the ERLC. What's a word of advice that you'd share with pastors as they talk to folks about these issues, as they're asked questions about issues that are really being kicked around in the public square?
Well, really, I have three pieces of advice for pastors. I think the first one is, first of all, really model for your people how to engage. And so that means that you're engaged on the issues, that you care about politics, but that you do it in a distinctly Christian way. That 1 Peter 3:15 urges us both to have an answer for every person for the hope that lies within us, but to do it with gentleness and kindness. And the way that pastors conduct themselves both online and in the community is really setting a standard and a model for people to follow. I think number two, I think pastors should be unafraid to address issues that the culture is wrestling with. And if we're preaching the whole counsel of God, we really are going to run into issues that the culture is wrestling with, whether it's issues of identity, whether it's issues of human sexuality, whether it's issues of the sanctity of life, or economic issues, all those things. And we need to make application that directly talks to the issues that our culture and people are wrestling with. So be unafraid to do that. We need to equip our people. And I think the third thing is we need to not just equip our people on the issue, so they understand, what does the Bible say about these things? What are the issues where the Bible is very clear? What are the issues where the Bible isn't so clear and good Christians can disagree? So we need to not only do the issues, but thirdly, we need to equip our people for how to live in the country in which we've been placed. Acts 17, Paul says that God has sovereignly put people in places according to his will. And so we have been placed here at this time in this moment. What does it look like to be a faithful Christian, to live that out? What does it look like to go to live Monday through Friday? How does it look like for us to live online, to conduct ourselves, to think and wrestle with politics? We need to equip our people for living in our representative republic, in our democracy, in a digital age, and doing it in a way that is faithful to Christ. And so really modeling it for pastors, teaching on the issues, and then giving our people tools for how to live Monday through Friday. I think a lot of times, one of the worries that pastors have, and I think it's a good one, is, hey, I don't want to be political. And I think pastors shouldn't be partisan. I don't think they should endorse candidates. I don't think they should become party headquarters. But the gospel is inherently political. And the way that God has called us to live is going to conflict in some ways with the culture. So we need to equip our people to live in the context where God has put them.
Yeah, that's good. Along those lines, we hear the sentence sometimes that elections have consequences. Voting really is, it's a valuable right. It's an important right. Talk a little bit about that, just about the need for people, for Americans in general, but even more so speaking to our Baptist Press audience, just the great need and privilege to get to vote.
Yeah, elections do have consequences. Who we put in office has a downstream effect. The people they appoint, the policies that they enact, the things that they champion. It matters, and it matters not just for us, but for our neighbors. And I really believe, look, every Christian has a different level of involvement based on their calling. And that'll look different for a United States senator as it will for, a PTA member and everything in between. But I don't think there's a category in the New Testament for us to be disengaged, because number one, the great commandment, if you love your neighbor as yourself, you should care about the world in which they live. And if you have an opportunity to shape that, it's hard for me, for instance, to tell my unborn neighbor that I could have spoke up for him or her, but I didn't. Or my impoverished neighbor or my immigrant neighbor, that I could have spoke up for them and I didn't. But secondly, if you look at Romans 13, it gives a responsibility of God delegates authority to human governments. But in our country, we have a government where power is shared by the people. So when I read Romans 13, it's not just the elected officials who are going to be held accountable by God, but it's also us who share power. We're a government of the people, by the people, for the people. And so I think we need to take the stewardship seriously. Now, what I think we do not need to do is make, even though politics is important, make it all important. And so I think we need to have our priorities straight, where we do the best we can, we engage our communities as best we can, we read up on the candidates, we vote, but we don't make it all important. Ultimately, politics and politicians will fail us in some way. We're in the already not yet, where the kingdom of God is here, but it's not here in full. So we're in a broken world, and even our best efforts will come up short. And so if we understand that ultimately we're citizens of another kingdom, that'll make us better citizens here. That'll help us hold it loosely. That'll help us engage in a way that is courageous and yet civil, and where we don't put all our hopes on the next election, but we really understand that really what happens every Sunday at your local church is really the most important thing happening in the world.
That's good. That's good. Well, thank you, Dan, for taking a few minutes with us here on Baptist Press this week.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for Baptist Press this week. Make sure to visit us at baptistpress.com, where you can stay up to date on the week's latest stories. While you're there, we hope that you'll subscribe to our morning and afternoon emails. You'll find the way to do that at baptistpress.com.